When Spider-Man vs. Deku was announced, I'll be honest, I wasn't interested in the slightest. We just had a My Hero Academia matchup not too long ago, and of all the characters to come back, I really didn't want it to be Deku. In fact, I was planning on making a video on why I really didn't like this matchup and why the timing is so horrible. But I had to look in the mirror and ask myself, is this the kind of person I want to be? I know for a fact I would have gotten a ton of views as long as I had a pretty catchy title. But was that worth it? Do I want to make a video being outwardly negative on something that doesn't exist yet? Well, no I don't. There are matchups I don't like that have had phenomenal episodes before, so I should treat this no differently. I want to judge this episode based on what it does, not what it could be, like I've done for every review before this one. So without further ado, what did I think of this episode overall? You're gonna have yourself like swinging and hitting a wall or something like that? I don't know, you're usually good at that.
Spider-Man!
Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Spider-Man's analysis is not that great. It was really important to stress how Miles differed from Peter, and that part was done good, explaining how the spider that bit Miles had the Oz formula, which gave Miles similar powers like the Spidey sense, but different powers like turning invisible, surging electricity through his body, and yes, even his wall crawling is different, magnetizing to surfaces instead of having specific fibers on his hands. Miles has an upgraded spider sense that acts more like a radar, can use a slight poison called Venom that of course is very important to this debate since it works better on those with genetic mutations. I'm sure that'll be enough to net Miles a win. We also have his electric constructs like whips or swords that he can make out of his electricity, being able to put his suit in an electrical overdrive to really maximize his damage, and his vibranium armor which will tank deadly blows. One fact I do like is how Miles loves anime and will constantly reference and use anime techniques when fighting, which is adapted really well into the animation. Here's where we get into what I don't like, how they covered Miles as a character. They start the analysis by saying, let's take it back from the top again. Like the last time they covered Peter was like a decade ago. Yes, I know it's a reference to a gag in Enter the Spider-Verse, but I still find it funny here. They briefly describe Peter Parker as a character, before talking about how he died, which forced Miles into the role of Spider-Man with no training and really no choice. We know that unlike Peter, Spider-Man had loving parents, and an uncle who was a villain that Miles needed to fight, which caused Miles' already ever-present self-doubt to get so much worse in that situation. They talk about that Miles does things his own way, which is a thing they said, but they should really talk about how Miles is different from Peter. But they do end on a positive note, talking about how anyone can be a hero, which does put a smile on my face. But wait, isn't something missing? Oh yeah, they really don't go into the connective tissue of why this matchup works. Spider-Man's death doesn't really feel as important as it should. Miles' intelligence also wasn't touched upon really at all. They didn't talk about Miles' self-sacrificing nature, etc. You may also be thinking, damn, they were really selective on what to include for Miles. Which, yeah, you'd be right, but it really doesn't change much except making the fight slightly closer. So I'm not too upset by that. Overall, I'm not impressed. Deku doesn't punch that hard, right? Yes, I like this one a little more. They started off by saying, but what is a hero? Which directly followed the ending words of Spider-Man's analysis. It's not something I've ever noticed before, but I really like it here. In fact, I do like a lot of this analysis, at least more than Miles's. We get a lot of things that were lacking in Miles's analysis. A better relationship dynamic with All Might, the fact that Deku started with no quirk and had to work his way up the ladder, the fact that he always wanted to save people but never had the power to do so, and the fact that even with power, he was willing to isolate himself and be the one who took all the damage as long as he could protect the others and keep them safe. One for All is an amazing quirk, powering up Deku's body and giving him a variety of abilities. He can use Black Whip to swing around and bind people, Float to float, Danger Sense to sense danger, Smokescreen to create a smokescreen, but most importantly, he has Gear Shift, where he can essentially control the inertia of himself and others, having full control of not only his own speed, but his enemies. Just like how Miles was inspired by anime, Deku was inspired by his friends, and his friends are anime, so they're the same, baby. Deku created the shoot style way of fighting based on Ida's kicks and speed, and Deku even learned a new fighting style called Full Cowling, which is based on Bakugo's fighting style. Fast, explosive movements that pack a punch. Unlike Peter, All Might didn't die, so Deku learned how to control his powers from their previous owner, which led me to believe Deku would take the skill category. We will talk about that later. I love that they end his analysis with talking about how Deku actually came back after losing his powers with a new armor and climbed his way back up the hero leaderboards. People treat Deku like a put the fries in the bag type character character after that issue of the manga was released. But he did come back and he still was awesome, so I'm glad they included it. They also end with a line saying everyone can be a hero, which parallels with Miles' analysis ending with anyone can be a hero. Nice touch, very nice indeed. Now there are 3 issues I have with this analysis. For one, cut that alpha male bullshit out of the episode. Nobody is here for that. 2, they didn't count Deku's AP, meaning that it most likely was going to be used in the conclusion to explain why Deku wins, kinda ruining the surprise. And 3, this is all really just milquetoast. What I mean by that is there's not much substance. It's all pretty basic information about the character, nothing really too deep. These 2 analyses are my least favorite of the season, which is really sad. I wanted to come out of this liking these characters in this matchup more, but I just didn't.
Ready? Clash!
But most people come to Death Battle for the fight itself, so let's discuss that. The setup is so cool. Spider-Man is swinging from building to building, but all of a sudden, his spidey sense goes off. He looks over to see Deku, who's colored to look like he's from a manga, swinging around the city as well. As the animation switches over to 3D movement, we see the ink fade away, showing Deku's amazing model. This setup implies that there was some sort of Spider-Verse-y crossover of universes here, seeing as in movies, the different universes have different art styles, and this is even expounded upon when looking at how Deku and Spider-Man look in this animation. Spider-Man is clearly 3D, and so is Deku, but Deku has his model covered in these amazing 2D textures that try to imitate the look of an anime, making these 2 people feel completely different. Where the setup was amazing, the banter was... well, the banter kinda sucks. Like, most of it seems so basic. Miles remarks that Deku isn't a spider. Deku challenges him to a fight. Miles does his don't watch the mouth, watch the hands line, and Deku responds with watch mine, even though all he does is flick his fingers, shooting air at Miles, meaning that Miles shouldn't be watching Deku's hands after all. Miles says guess who after Deku gets webbed up, which sounds like the setup of a joke, but that's all we get. Miles certainly loves that Deku does in fact have skills. Deku's line about how he moved to an abandoned part of the city so they can go all out because he always does his best sounds really cringy. Like they put 2 unrelated lines together. Those 2 things don't seem mutually exclusive to me. But the end of the fight has some better dialogue. Deku calls Spider-Man's quirk amazing, and Spider-Man responds by saying amazing was someone else and that he was the ultimate Spider-Man. Although I would have changed this line to have Miles just say he was the ultimate, I still love the reference. Along with Miles saying he's done his own thing when transitioning to his electrical overdrive. My favorite line is when Deku says that adamantium absorbs blows but doesn't fully nullify them, which is something directly pulled from My Hero as something All Might said about the Nomu. I do have a bit of an issue because it is just taking a quote from another character and having Deku say it, but it works in this situation. You may notice that Miles says 2 things in Spanish for this fight. He says mierda, which just means shit, and un salto de fe, which means a leap of faith. The latter line is used in a place that I wouldn't necessarily have placed it, but I love that Puerto Rican representation. Oh yeah, actually, now that I think about it, they didn't even talk about Miles' heritage. I guess that's a little weird to talk about here. Like I said before though, the banter was kinda meh. Comparing this to something like Shigaraki vs. Mahito, where almost every line of dialogue felt so personal, this feels very bare bones. Nothing to really write home about. Unlike this fight is dripping with style. So much so that it really does look like it could be from the Spider-Verse movies. The choreography itself is pretty good. They both show off their abilities really well. Spidey swings with his webs, Deku with his black whip. Deku creates a smokescreen to get away from Spider-Man, and Miles uses his enhanced Spidey sense to find Izuku in the smokescreen. Deku is able to react to Miles' fist flying towards him, but not the web that is shot into his face after the punch, showing the difference between their senses. Miles webs up Izuku in a scene where Deku doesn't look like he's stuck in the web, but then Miles does a reference to Spider-Man vs. Batman and everything's good again. After entering the abandoned part of the city, Deku starts flinging buildings at Spider-Man, and he uses his gear shift to get himself bursts of speed to catch Miles off guard. Miles overloads his electrical powers, creates an electric sword, shoots electric kamehamehas, and tries to end the fight with a Chidori from Naruto. Remember, he's an anime fan. This results in the final punch class, which looks beautiful, but the death really sucks. I think the implication is that Deku uses gear shift on himself and Spider-Man at the same time, forcing Spider-Man to be stuck in place while Deku greatly accelerates his fists into Spider-Man, hitting him really hard and really fast. Here's the issue though. It's unclear what's happening and looks kinda funny. Spider-Man just does a mild grunt when getting pounded with fists that have absolutely no impact. It kinda just looks straight, screams a little bit, and then explodes, which is now the second time that Miles doesn't have much of a reaction to exploding. I really like Deku's facial expression and the line after the fight, but on the Spider-Man end, I think the scene is pretty bad. As a whole though, my issues with the choreography are very minor. It's definitely the highlight of this episode, expounded by a song that fits this vibe perfectly. The track is titled You Say Danger. It's a pretty bad title. It combines the songs You Say Run in My Hero with What's Up Danger from Into the Spider-Verse. The name isn't creative, but it does a serviceable job, I guess. The song itself is really cool, mixing the more synth styles of Enter the Spider-Verse with the more more heroic orchestra of My Hero. It's a really interesting mix that works really well for the fight, and if you listen really closely, you can hear some of Deku vs. Asta's song Strongest Alive mixed in there as well. It's not my favorite song, but it's pretty good. The lyrics are what you expect, the two fighters talking about their histories in this world, reflecting on their places. But for Miles' side, he said you can't make it here in BK, which both means Brooklyn and Burger King, referencing how Deku worked at fast food after his hero days. That's so fucking brutal. With that out of the way, what would I add to this fight? I would add dialogue to make these two relate. Something about having to walk in the shoes of someone who was well established and had some major accomplishments. How even though they felt inferior, they will continue to do their best for those around them. That really would have hit hard as an interaction in this fight. I like that Deku wanted to fight at an abandoned part of the city, but I would change how they got there. I would like the fight to start off in the air, but have both get closer to the ground, flying past people, potentially putting them in danger. Both of them taking a moment to look down at everyone, before silently agreeing to go towards an abandoned part of the city that's in eyeshot of where they are. It would have been a cool character moment that shows how much Spider-Man truly cares about the little guys. And lastly, I'd want Miles' invincibility to be more important. I didn't really mention it because it's not really a factor in the fight, but Miles only uses invincibility once. It would be cool that, at least for one interaction, have Miles continuously disappear out of sight, webbing Deku, throwing attacks, and generally putting Deku on the back foot. Deku overthinks a lot, so having a moment where he can't sit back and think would have been really awesome. I had my issues with the analysis and the fight, but how was the conclusion? So like, we all knew Deku was gonna win, right? This should come as no surprise to anyone. And I believe what they focused in on the conclusion and the categories they chose are exactly the ones I thought DB would go with. Calling superpowers tied is strange. They both have advantages and disadvantages, sure, but Deku's more overpowered abilities would eclipse Miles no matter what. Gear Shift in my eyes alone would turn the tide here, seeing as it would give Deku the speed advantage, while also giving him the ability to take away Spider-Man's speed in most of his movements. Deku can do this with a touch, so even with Miles' Spidey sense, I don't think he had many ways to avoid Deku after he starts using this ability. But I get it. Danger Sense isn't as good as the Spidey Sense, but I still think the edge should have gone to Deku. Deku no shit gets speed. They both get capped to around light speed at their best, and Deku has Gear Shift which can take Spider-Man's speed away. Easy dub. I almost agree that Miles should take the skill category, but I find their explanation a bit weird. So DB usually separates skill from experience, but they didn't do that here. Miles has better experience, but Deku should be more skilled. If you are combining the categories, I think Miles should take this, but I find it strange that the category isn't called skill/experience. Also, has skill ever decided a victor for DB? I see the category a lot, but it never leads to a character's victory. Just kind of something I noticed here. And now power. Yeah, no shit, Deku takes this. So they talk about the difference in strength, which they didn't calculate for Deku's analysis, so it was obvious who won this. They do spin this in kind of a fun way though, talking about how even if there is such a big strength gap, would Deku be able to get through the vibranium suit? The answer is obviously yes. Deku is just far too powerful. Also, they don't mention this, but couldn't Gear Shift stop the vibration of Spider-Man's suit, causing it to essentially be worthless? I'm not sure if that's how it works, but that's what I thought would happen leading into this episode. After everything, I think a good grade for this episode is a C. Aside from a few moments, the analysis and conclusion felt very by the numbers. And the fight, while stylized and choreographed well, had some of the worst banter we've gotten in a while. I really didn't want to be negative going into this review because I felt like it was really predictable for me, seeing as I didn't like the matchup to begin with. But these are my true feelings and I hope nobody flames me over them. In any case, I hope you all enjoyed watching this. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I guess I should also ask you to subscribe even though I feel like a shill for doing that. Take care everyone, and have a wonderful day. Oh, also, thank you, Burger Weeb, for editing this. I can't tell you how immensely this helps. Okay, bye for real this time. Have a good one, guys.